Hi, I'm Melanie with Fort Worth Fabric Studio, and happy National Jelly Roll Day. Today we have a really fun surprise for you. We're going to make a jelly roll quilt together. It's the Jelly Roll Race to the Finish Line. It's fun, it's fast, and a free pattern. Are you ready to get going? So the first thing you will need is your Jelly Roll Race to the Finish Line pattern. It's free and available to download on the Fort Worth Fabric Studio website. The link is also right below our video, so you can go ahead and grab it there. And then of course you will need a jelly roll. Today we're gonna go ahead and sew Smitten. It's the new Bonnie and Camille line and I love it. So I'm super excited to sew this online with you guys today. I've already made this quilt and I did this in Bada Bing by me and my sister's designs. I love it. So this is what we're gonna make today. Are you ready? Perfect. So go grab your pattern, grab your jelly roll, and let's get cutting and sewing our pattern. Okay, you have your jelly roll, you have your pattern, now let's get cutting. So the hardest part first for a lot of people is unrolling that Moda strip to get our jelly rolls done. So let's go ahead and do that and start cutting. Like I said, we made a couple changes to the original Jelly Roll Race to make it a little bit more scrappy and fun, which I love. Plus I love the straight seams. So how we achieve that, first things we do is we unroll our jelly roll. Isn't this lovely? So you have 40 strips that come in a jelly roll that are 2.5 inches wide. So how we cut them, we don't need to measure, we keep it nice and simple. I cut about 6 strips at a time. A lot of it, or even 4, a lot of it just depends how sharp your rotary cutter is, how many you can cut through. You're just gonna eyeball, so I have my jelly roll here. I'm just gonna select, I'll do 4 strips actually, because that will be 8 when I cut through twice. So go ahead, you just line them up. I'm gonna try and do it low, hope you can see it. Line them up right here so you have your 4 strips, like so. You're gonna lay them down on the mat, and you're just gonna take your cutter and your rotary, just go to the very end, and you're just gonna trim it in half that way. So, we aren't measuring it, nice and simple, just like that. Go ahead, do the same thing to the other end. We wanna go ahead and cut off our selvages. Like I said, we're not gonna measure, we just wanna kinda eyeball it, and we're gonna go ahead and cut off those. And that is all the cutting that you need for this. It will give you about 2 strips, about 21 inches long per one. And I'm gonna go ahead and cut the rest of my jelly roll up just like that. So if you wanna watch, great. And you will go ahead and use all the jelly roll strips. So don't worry about picking out your favorites or putting them in line. You will use every one, and don't worry, they're all super cute. There we go. So now you have 40 strips, 2.5 inches wide, thanks Moda. And then now that you've cut them in half, they're about 21 so inches long, so you have a total of 80. Now it's time to go ahead and get these sewn together and watch the jelly roll magic start to appear with sewing. Let's get ready to sew our Jelly Roll Race to the Finish Line quilt. So you've already unrolled your jelly roll, you've downloaded your pattern from Fort Worth Fabric Studio, and you have all of your jelly roll strips cut. It took us less than 5 minutes to get those cut. We just trimmed off the selvage, and then we trimmed off kind of where the fold was. No need to measure, eyeballing is perfectly fine. Now it's time to sew those 80 strips together. And go ahead, just pick them randomly. So I have my jelly roll pile right here. I'm gonna go ahead and grab my first strip, like this. I'm gonna go ahead and grab my second strip. You don't need to think about it, just go ahead and sew. I probably wouldn't sew them like all the exact same together. And you don't want to do mirror images because you will be folding them together. So what I find, just put a pile of them and just start picking and sewing. So that's what we're going to do. We're going to go ahead and sew with a 1/4 inch seam. So right sides together, they're placed. Hold on, let me get my machine foot up. And we're going to get sewing just a 1/4 inch and just be consistent. If you're not consistent, not a big deal. This is why it's a great beginner quilt. And then we just start sewing. And then you can cut and trim, but I just grab the last end since there's plenty of space, and I flip it right side up on my machine. I go ahead, I grab the next strip next to me, and I place it right sides together. just edging up the two sides like this, if you can see. And I just keep sewing a 1/4 inch seam for a nice straight seam because I like the straight seams. And you will do this for a total until you get through all 80 strips. And they're kind of sticking together. That's okay. I know some people, to keep things truly random, they'll go ahead and stick them in like a bag and pull them out of a bag that way. The bag is just an extra step for me, so I go ahead and just put them in the pile next to me and start sewing. The first couple strips you do sew together, they will either be the bottom or the top of your quilt, so if you want to kind of plan it that way, that's really the only planning you can do with this, since the further technique for these are just randomly kind of placed, so you can't really predict. Well, I guess you maybe could predict if you were like a math wizard. Oh, and don't panic. So here you can see I missed a piece of the selvage. No big deal. So what I'm going to do for that is I'm just going to grab my fabric and make sure I place the next one just a little to the side of where the selvage is. See? And so my 1/4 inch line from right there. And so no big deal. You're not going to see the selvage in my finished quilt. Definitely not going to go back to my cutting board and cut it that way. And just keep sewing until you've gone through all 80 strips. Okay, now we're down to our final strip. Hooray, you've done it. You've sewed almost 80 strips together for your jelly roll race to the finish line. So let's get that last one sewn. Okay. So now we have a giant jelly roll. So next thing I'm going to do, because this is super duper long, is I'm going to go ahead and snip between each seam. Since I didn't do that, I'm going to snip, and then we can go ahead and sew it together. I know most people decide not to iron first because they're really trying to race and get it done, so you can totally do that if you want. I am going to go ahead and iron it because, well, I like to, so that's what I'm going to go ahead and do. So I will be right back after I snip all these seams and iron mine, and then we'll go ahead and start sewing ours together. We're almost there. So I went ahead and I ironed my strips because I like flat seams. It took about 15 minutes, so it's up to you what you'd like to do there. So I went ahead and did that. Now I have all 1,600 plus inches of jelly roll sewn together, pressed, ready to go ahead and start assembling my quilt top. Before I start sewing it together, just so I don't have my seams landing on top of each other, we need to offset the quilt a little bit. So one of my end strips right here, I'm going to go ahead and just trim off 9 inches. So I have it lined up on my cutting mat, I've got my ruler, 9 inches, and I'm going to go ahead and cut right there. So this is the only piece of your jelly roll that you will not be using. So I love a no waste quilt. So to go ahead and assemble it, this is probably one of the trickiest parts, is you're going to take an end and then you got to find the other end and fold it in half and then start sewing. Aha, this is the end. So you want to go ahead and you want to match them up, and then you're going to sew along the entire length of the strip that you've sewn. So about 800 inches or so. If you want to be super careful, you could line up to make sure there's no twist at the end. If there's a twist in the end, I'm not really going to panic because I'm going to be trimming off the end to go ahead and fold and do my next set. So I feel fine going like this and not worrying about do I have a twist or not. So I'm going to drop my thing there. I'm going to scoot my chair over so now you can see me sewing, and we're going to go ahead and start sewing it together. So remember, I have the two ends right side together. We're going to sew with a 1/4 inch seam down the entire length of our long strip. So here we go. Exciting! And see, by offsetting it, I don't know if you can tell right here, there's not going to be a seam right here, versus if we didn't offset it, then all of our seams would be matching here. Sometimes they'd be lined up, sometimes they wouldn't. So this makes life a lot easier to go ahead and do it this way. And then we just sew with a 1/4 inch down the whole thing. and just keep sewing until you get to the very end, and we'll go from there. Okay, so we've been sewing our long strip of fabric, and now we're coming to the end. Like I said, the end might get a little bit twisted. I want to just show you here if you can see through my machine. It's twisted, that's okay. What we're gonna do is we're gonna go clear to the very, very end, kind of fold it in half, and then just snip it with scissors. It may not end exactly the same, that's okay. Once we're done with our quilt, we're gonna go ahead and trim it up anyways. So let me go ahead and show you, and then we're gonna be moving on to the next steps. Right up there, my cute little scissors with strawberries on them. Okay, we're getting towards the end. Okay, so we did it. So we have our strip folded in half and sewn. So the width of it is 4.5 inches once I iron it by about 800. So still pretty long. So this gives us 2 rows. So what we're gonna do is repeat again. We're gonna fold it in half. So again, lengthwise, trim it at the end, and then you have 4 rows. And then again, you'll have 8 rows. Then again for 16 rows, and then one final time for 32 rows. So it should be a full 32 rows in length, which is what gives us about a 64.5 inch length of our quilt. That might vary depending on what your seam allowance is. So I know I'm gonna go ahead and press mine because I love to iron and I like the way it feels when I'm sewing when it's ironed. But you don't need to, but I like to, so I'm gonna head over to my iron now. Iron and then fold and start sewing again for the next section. Okay, we're back from ironing. So we have our strip that we just sewn. Just like before, we take the one end of our strip and the far end of the other strip. We're going to go ahead and just put them together, right sides together, and then we're going to do the same thing as before and sew along a 1/4 inch all the way down until we get to the end. When you get to the end, go ahead and just trim it if it's twisted. Then, sew as far as you can until you get to the twist, and then cut it, and that will be about halfway at the end, and then trim it up. That way you have the nice edge to go ahead and start again. So let's go ahead and sew our next set. So soon we will have 4. Okay, and we're back from ironing our strips together. So we have 4 strips sewn together. So it's 8.5 inches wide. We're gonna do the same as we've done before, as by grabbing our strips and putting them right sides together until we have a strip set like this. I would recommend making sure it's fully flat and not twisted at the bottom at this point. We have a lot of strips together, so if it gets twisted, you're gonna lose some width on your final quilt when you go to trim it up. So make sure it's nice and flat, just like before. So right sides together, we will sew a 1/4 inch seam allowance down the entire length of the strip. Let's get sewing, we're almost done. We now have sewn 8 rows of Jelly Roll strips all together. So we're going to go ahead and do the same thing as we did before by putting right sides together and sewing a 1/4 inch seam allowance down the entire length of the strip. If you're following along with our directions, that means we are about to start on step 6. So after this, we'll do it to get our 16 rows, then just one more time after this for our full 32 row quilt. So we're almost there. It looks starting to look like a quilt or a very, very long table runner. Let's get sewing. And we're on to our final seam of our quilt. So we have 16 in here. We're gonna go ahead, take our 2 sides, match them up together, and do our final seam all the way down. Make sure that they are flat all the way together. You don't wanna get a twist at the end or you will lose inches off your quilt. So nice and flat, final seam, let's get sewing, and then we will have a quilt to show in just a few minutes. Okay, so just our final last stitches. You'll get to the very end. Go ahead, catch your thread, and we're gonna do our trim and open it up, and we should have a full quilt. So here it is, down the length I sewed. Bring it over to my cutting mat right here. My head's probably gonna vanish, so don't worry, but I'm still here. And we're gonna fold along the line here to go ahead and trim our quilt open. And I have a tiny cutting mat, so we're gonna cut more than I would usually do at a time, but it's okay. And You can use scissors and go ahead and cut along that way, but I'm gonna go ahead and use my rotary cutter because that's what I have right here. Okay, let's see the magic. And here is our Jelly Roll Race to the Finish Line quilt. Yay! See, we did it. It's ready to go, so all you need to do next is just trim up your edges, quilt it, and bind it, and you are set. Isn't it fabulous? And it took less than 5 minutes to cut the quilt out. Nice straight seams, super scrappy, and plus it's a full jelly roll, which I love not having wasted fabric. So, perfect project, and the smitten is just gorgeous. Don't forget to go to the Fort Worth Fabric Studio website to go ahead and download your free pattern, the Jelly Roll Race to the Finish Line. There is a link below the video here. And I just wanted to let you know the quilt behind me is the Scrappy Spool mini quilt that I made. It's also a kit at Fort Worth Fabric Studio, so check it out. It's super fun. It does this great interfacing, which was a really cool technique, and I liked it. And in case you wanted to see the previous jelly roll one I made with Bada Bing, here we go. And she has kits for this one if they're still available. So there's kits and super cute cherry backing. Love the cherry with the gingham. I haven't decided which backing for my smitten yet. Probably one of the navy florals because I love it. And so we're all set. Thank you again for watching and sewing along with us, and happy Jelly Roll Day.